Hello, everyone. Welcome to the conference. I'm Tom Mackey, Professor of Arts and Media at SUNY, Empire State College.
And I'm Trudi Jacobson. I'm the head of the Information Literacy Department and Distinguished Librarian at the State University of New York, University at Albany.
And we are now going to share our slides and start our presentation. And if we begin here, we're very excited to be talking about meta-literacy in particular, and how we embed meta-literacy in learning design using open educational resources that we've developed. This has very much been a project of both theory and practice, and developing resources that other people can use, other educators and students. So I'm going to move forward and provide an overview of what our paper is about and what our presentation is about today. So we'll talk about recasting information literacy as a meta-literacy. Initially, we use the term reframing, and we'll talk through that. We'll talk about the relevance of meta-literacy in this post-truth environment. And then we'll really talk about the model in detail. So we'll be looking at the core components of meta-literacy, including the learning domains, the roles, the characteristics, and the goals. And then we'll be discussing components as designs for learning, and then learning design for sustained engagement. And we'll talk through all these ideas, and we'll start with recasting information literacy as a meta-literacy. And Trudi?
Thank you, Tom. So we started to think about the viability of information literacy as it was defined at the time, around a little bit before 2010. Mm-hmm. And that's when we realized that something new was needed. We'll be going into that, but what we've got here are a couple of slides about current definitions of information literacy that have really moved on from where we were back in about 2010. So this is the framework for information literacy for higher education, put out by the Association of College and Research Libraries in the United States. And as you can see by the definition on the left, it is much more than just sort of what it is you can do. And what it is you know. So there are the abilities, but there's reflective discovery, there's understanding how information is produced and valued, and then there's the creation of new knowledge and participating in communities of learning. And meta-literacy did have an impact on that. This definition of information literacy really places it solidly within the academic discourse, but it does go beyond that. It's not just research for courses. The second definition comes from the United Kingdom, from SILIP. And here, this is a very sort of holistic definition of information literacy. It does not have the sort of the academic angle that the ACRL definition has, but it is emphasizing citizenship, which is really very important. And the developing a meta-literacy mindset. So this goes back to the way information literacy was sort of originally conceived, and some of the gaps we thought needed to be challenged. So that skills-based approach, we really had difficulties with that because it was so limited in its scope. Meta-literacy mindset really emphasizes critical thinking, reflection, in order to sort of situate oneself in the information environment. Also in the environment with others through social media, online communities. And critically, it's not just the consumption of information, but also the production and sharing of information. And Tom, could you take it from here for the post-truth world?
Absolutely. So clearly we live in an environment where the concept of truth and trust are really challenged. And this is just an excellent quote from Andy Rooney. I think that really captures this, that people will generally accept facts as truth only if the facts agree with what they already believe. So clearly getting at this idea of confirmation bias, which we've been all grappling with and dealing with as part of this issue. So at this moment, the term post-truth really reemerged. It had been around for some time, but it really reemerged as part of the Brexit movement in the UK and of course, the presidential election in 2016. But it's an issue that is still with us, and everything from the 2020 election and the responses to that, and also the obviously the COVID pandemic and how there's been such division about this. But when we really looked at this moment, especially in response to 2016, we saw an opportunity for metaliteracy, that this idea of misinformation and disinformation and how an individual sort of deals with this is why this kind of holistic model we see as incredibly valuable within this context, especially when information is intentionally distorted. So we're going to start with looking at the core components of metaliteracy in this metaliteracy model. And by the way, this is really now the fully developed model that we've been developing since the beginning, but we're really excited with the sort of the holistic nature of this and the way that we can talk about this. It's very much, if you noticed, focused on the individual. So in some ways, or in many ways, it's more about the learner than it is about information, because it's about the way the learner learns and engages with information as an individual and also in collaborative participatory environments. So Trudi will talk about in the next slide, sort of that, the center part of the diagram where the metaliterate learner is at the center, surrounded by 4 domains of learning, from the metacognitive, the cognitive, behavioral, affective. Clearly the meta and metaliteracy is the metacognitive, but there's some other aspects of that prefix that we've been working with. And if you go outwards and look at these different spheres of this diagram, the outer ring is really about the roles that individuals play. And it's very much focused on how individuals interact with information and each other. So producer clearly is a central focus, but also publisher, researcher, participant, communicator, translator of information, being an author, and then of course, teacher. There's an important focus here on learner as teacher. And then if you look at the next piece of this in the center, the characteristics are closely aligned with those learner roles. So this idea of the learner role is really important because it's not just about the information, it's about the roles that individuals play through their interaction with each other and information.
So Tom mentioned the 4 learning domains, and you'll notice on the right-hand side, the cognitive, which is what students or learners would know upon completion of a learning activity, and the behavioral, what they'd be able to do. Those are ones that really are emphasized in learning and were emphasized in earlier models of information literacy. So we feel that the metacognitive, that reflection upon your learning, reflecting upon what you know and what you need to continue to learn, and the affective, sort of how you feel about the learning or the content of what you're learning, are really truly important. And on the next slide, you will see that a student in a course actually that I taught considers the affective learning domain. And he is talking about going from being sort of helpless and clueless to motivated and reassured, and how the affective domain really has a big impact on learning. There are also these learner roles, and Tom mentioned that a couple of them when he was going over the integrated model. They're not in any particular order, and often the roles sort of work together. So for example, you may be researching something in order to write something or to publish something, but these are really important in being called out for learners to sort of understand that there is sort of a will here that they need to think about these roles, how they see themselves in the roles, and really sort of do the best they're able to. So, for example, learners are often surprised to see teacher, one that Tom mentioned on this diagram and as one of our roles. But as you are learning something, you are able to share it with others. And being able to share it, you learn it better. But there are real responsibilities involved with this. And on the next screen, you'll see a student quote reflecting on the roles and learning. And so this student is talking about the different roles, and he said that it helps him to comprehend things more easily, but he sees himself in a different way. On the next slide, this is an example of meta learners being publishers, and students in a course that I teach actually contribute to Wikipedia. And Alex, in this quote, shows that by it being real, meaningful, they can see the impact of their work. This really emphasizes that they are taking on these roles with a sense of responsibility. And in the next slide, for collaboration, another student talks about the importance of collaborating and being able to see other points of view, and that this is really an important part of it just being a producer of information, a participant in collaborating with others. Tom, would you like to take on the characteristics?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And the characteristics you'll see are very much aligned with the roles. And as Trudi mentioned, the roles are used in different ways. They're combined, and trying to bring this to the foreground where students see this is really important. In many ways, the characteristics are the outcome of this work. So being a producer of information allows one to gain this quality, this attribute of being productive. Being a researcher, it encourages one to be informed. And doing so in these collaborative environments means that you can be collaborative, participatory, and of course, reflective. And it's incredibly important as you see this model. We focus on several of these: productive, collaborative, reflective, of course, which brings forward the metacognitive, but also thinking through the context of the environment that we're in, post-truth world, that there's also a responsibility that individuals have to their communities, which is why we added civic-minded as one of the key characteristics. So it's one thing to be informed and collaborative and participatory, but what are your responsibilities as a learner in these kinds of social environments is really important. And Trudi and I, we've developed the theory, we've developed these tools for educators to work with students. And this is very much a scholarship of pedagogy, a kind of a approach, so that really it is these kinds of experiences that we're really studying as part of our research, and how students respond to these tools and these concepts. Trudi, as part of that, you can talk about one of the projects that you've been working on in your own teaching.
Yes, and so on the last slide, you notice the sort of in the collaborative box, it mentioned that students can be co-creators of knowledge, and in the productive box, it talks about them sort of reflecting on what it is they're doing. So in this case, I had a class of first semester students, and I asked them to create a website with resources for other first-year students. And this was during the pandemic, very difficult time. But the students really had an opportunity to think about sort of their role on campus or off campus, as the case may be, but as first year students, and what would other first year students need to know? And they learned about meta literacy, and then they started to create infographics and blogs and videos and a variety of media. And it was, I think, the perfect way for them to realize that they can contribute as a meta-literate learner. Tom.
So we've talked about the theory and the diagram. Really what supports that is the meta-literacy goals and learning objectives that we've been developing. And it's interesting too, this context of the post-truth world, when in our last book, Meta-literate Learning for the Post-Truth World, we revised the goals and learning objectives specifically to address these kinds of issues with confirmation bias and misinformation and disinformation, and trying to gain a more critical perspective on the social media tools that we've all been using, that our students are immersed in. So if we look at the 4 primary goals, and each goal has a set of objectives, and all of these are transferable to different environments. So we've worked with them in different ways, and they're also adaptable. So you can try these out on your own. But if we look at the larger themes, I think you'll see how these really support the concepts that we've been talking about. So goal 1 is really focused on actively evaluating content, and not just evaluating information, because remember, this is also about the individual. So it's really evaluating one's own biases as part of that. So looking for bias information, but also looking for bias and critically examining oneself through reflection. Goal 2 is really engaging with all intellectual property in a way that is both ethical and responsible. So that's through the research of intellectual property, clearly, and also the production of intellectual property. So understanding Creative Commons, understanding the difference between original and repurposed information, how to license that information. Goal 3, very much this idea of learner as producer is really one of the central roles within meta literacy. So it's really focused on producing and sharing information in environments that are both collaborative and participatory. So it's not just about the individual creating information, but it's also what is the collaborative potential of that, and what are your responsibilities in terms of producing information. And because we see meta-literacy very much as a learning theory for lifelong learning, the 4th goal really creates that trajectory. So it's really about the learner taking charge of their own learning goals and developing learning strategy to meet their own personal and professional goals, which is a key aspect of that. We also show here too, if you go to metaliteracy.org, you'll see the goals and learning objectives, and you'll see several translations of the goals and learning objectives. And we're so happy with that interest, that global interest in these goals and objectives. So now we'll focus on learning design for sustained engagement. One of the projects that we've focused on, and we create a link here that you can definitely check out, which is a Lumen Learning project, which is, there's a specific meta-literacy module within a larger learning resource for new college students. So you can see how we've developed this here. So really practical resources in terms of what does it mean to be a meta-literate learner? What is it to be a meta-literate researcher? Again, the focus on producer, collaborator, the responsibilities of a digital citizen who's civic-minded, and again, that trajectory to lifelong learning. Again, openly available. We've developed several MOOCs over the years, and we developed our most recent one is empowering yourself in a post-truth world. Originally, we developed it in Open edX, then we developed it, we revised it for Coursera, so people are finding it. If you look at the main themes here, it really is about how an individual can empower themselves in these environments. What is it to be an expert? What is expertise? This theme of building communities of trust emerged as one of the key themes from this particular MOOC, and how to do that as a civic-minded meta-literate learner, how to examine media in these contexts, how to raise and share your voice, and ultimately how to reinvent a truthful world. And I just want to show too that one of the, again, we're focused on how these concepts and themes are in resources are used in teaching. So in my teaching, I developed an fully online metaliteracy course in Moodle that links to the MOOC as an open resource. And I write about in our new book about metaliterate learners as producers. And this quote, I think, really captures it and captures the meaning and purpose of introducing themes related to truth and trust in these kinds of information environments. And this is from one of my graduate students who took this course and also successfully completed the MOOC. And that experience, we've been trying to find ways to embed these concepts. I also developed a brand new course called Ethics of Digital Art and Design. And it just shows how you can transfer these ideas, how you can adapt them to courses that are not necessarily about, post-truth world, but those themes still resonate. So in this particular course, it's a fully online course that grapples with issues of content creation and the ethical issues related to the digital arts. So there's a focus on teamwork. Some of the topics relate to digital manipulation in art and photojournalism. I use this resource called Linker Education that allows you to have students create professional profiles, develop multimedia publications, and ultimately develop a portfolio of their work. So they get to experience what it means to be a producer of information as a metaliterate learner. So even, we're trying to embed these themes in other courses beyond those that we mentioned. So we're very excited about this work. So that's really our presentation. Our new book is Metaliteracy in a Connected World, Developing Learners as Producers. And we really delve into many of these themes. We present the latest metaliteracy model, and we also have 3 case studies. Correct, Trudi? So we have 3 theory chapters and 3 case studies.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.